Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at the Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. I'm Perrin Keys, joined tonight, actually, as the Sugar Bowl is about to get underway, and as the Rose Bowl is just finished up. I'm sure everybody else was watching along with us, so that's why we are coming post-game, but a little bit later after post-game with LSU's victory over Wisconsin in the ReliaQuest Bowl. On Monday, Wilson is here. Wilson Alexander, our lead LSU football beat reporter. Scott Rabalais is here. They are joining us from Tampa. Hello, Rab. And I'm coming from the ground floor of the Superdome, where I'm about to go out and watch Washington and Texas get it on. So, but without further ado, we should discuss business at hand. LSU takes care of the Badgers. They had to come back from two 14-point deficits. Garrett Nussmeier leads the team on a 98-yard drive, and then the defense, really for the first time in the entire game, shows up and dominates when they absolutely have to. And LSU comes out with a 35-31 win, wrapping up Brian Kelly's second season with another 10-win record. So, gentlemen, how you guys doing? Give us your thoughts just a little bit about what you've seen today. Wilson, go ahead.
Well, obviously, it was a good ending to the season for LSU to come out with a win. You know, anytime that you win a game, that's a positive thing. And I think anybody who had some questions about Garrett Nussmeier, sure, those might still be lingering a little bit after this game. But he answered quite a bit of questions about him, especially with the 98-yard drive to win it, there at the end. That was an impressive display of poise and composure and arm talent as well, getting LSU in the right play. He even checked on the last touchdown throw to Brian Thomas with the protections, and then wanting to make sure he got the ball to BT to give him a chance to win the game, the best receiver out on the field at that point. And so, you come away from this game feeling, I think, good about what LSU did this season to some degree, but also with some, certainly some concerns and question marks, particularly on the defensive side of the ball heading into next year that are going to have to get addressed.
Rab, your 2 cents on the 30,000-foot view of what unfolded down there in Tampa.
Well, there's a lot to unpack in this game, but I would say, the offense and Nussmeier got better as the game went along. They started with a little shaky, some punts early, got down 14-0, and then got down again by 14 points, as you said, early in the third quarter. But they finished the game strong on offense and on defense. But LSU did not play well most of the game on defense. They gave up, 500 yards to Wisconsin, got really, shredded by Tanner Mordecai, the Wisconsin quarterback, who hadn't had a game like this all season. And that leaves a lot of questions about the defense. But a win is a win. It's worth celebrating. It's 10 wins in back-to-back seasons, something has not happened a lot at LSU. And it's as Brian Kelly said, it is a sign of stability. But there are a lot of things to work on going forward, because the bar has been raised for LSU. A couple of years with Brian Kelly, his first 2 years, to try to get things going. But now the bar is raised for the future. Expectations will only increase with an expanded college football playoff starting next season. But LSU's in position to elevate its play with those things. But there's work to be done and a lot of interesting decisions to be made in the offseason starting very soon.
Work to be done. Well, specifically, let's just get to it, because I think that's this is the question of the day, if not the question of the year. Is there work to be done on the coaching staff? We know there's work to be done in terms of hiring an offensive coordinator and or promoting an offensive coordinator and then backfilling that position if that's the way that Brian Kelly decides to go. But that's not the question at hand. The question at hand is, should there be changes on the defensive staff? Rab, I'll let you go first.
I don't like to call for anybody to get fired or anything like that, but I don't think you can keep going exactly the way that you have been going with this defensive staff. They've given up. Today was the 8th time in 13 games they gave up 30 or more points. LSU came in just woefully ranked nationally in a lot of key stats: total defense, scoring defense, third down conversion defense, and Wisconsin took advantage of a lot of these things for most of the game. And this is a Wisconsin team that was mediocre at best
That's correct.
Offensively this year. They were transitioning in their first year under Luke Fickell from a kind of a ground and pound Wisconsin attack to something more modern, more wide open. So they didn't quite have the personnel that they wanted to do to run that kind of offense, and they were missing their starting center, they were missing their top running back, they were missing their top wide receiver, and yet they shredded LSU a lot of the game. And this was, I guess, it's one game, it's a bowl game. Hey, bowl games are kind of exhibitions now and everything, but it's typical of what LSU has done this year. At the end of the game, when the chips were down, they got it done. They sacked Tanner Mordecai 3 straight times, and held Wisconsin down after Garrett Nussmeier led LSU on an epic drive, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But I just don't see how Brian Kelly cannot make changes on this defense. If not with Matt House, the defensive coordinator, with maybe some of the position coaches, I would not feel good if I was some of those guys. He said he's going to evaluate the staff. Wilson asked him a pretty direct question after the game about that, and he said he's going to make some evaluations now. Now is the time to do it. He's got to hire an OC, and we're going to see if he's going to be hiring some defensive coaches too.
Wilson, what did Brian Kelly tell you, and what do you expect? We're going to sort of creep a little bit into the speculative game here, and I don't intend to, but what is Brian Kelly's 2 cents on this whole matter? What is he revealing at this point, and what do you anticipate seeing, in the weeks to come?
Just about every time that we talked to Brian Kelly since even at the very end of the Texas A&M game, from then on over the last month or so here, we've asked him at some point about the defensive staff and if something is going to be changed. And he is essentially filibustered all the way through. He's actually done, hat tip. He's done a pretty good job of doing that, of saying a lot without really saying much at all in terms of with any degree of detail about what it is that he wants to do on the defensive side of the ball. It's interesting because Brian Kelly has said at times this season, especially over the second half of the year, he thought that LSU had made improvement. He thought even in this game that the second half showed signs of what LSU wanted to be going into 2024. But like Rab pointed out, they still gave up 31 points. Wisconsin had not scored more than 30 points in a game except for one time this season. And then it did against LSU. And, so as for, Brian Kelly said, I asked him today, just where are you at with your evaluations of the defensive staff, especially as it relates to Matt House? And he didn't say anything specifically other than this was maybe the most revealing thing, was that he had wanted continuity getting through the recruiting and getting through the bowl game, which is, I think all of us sort of figured at this point, because they hadn't made a change, that he was trying to kind of keep things together to get through this with some level of stability. But then he said that he'll make his evaluations now after, which is something he has said repeatedly over the last month, now that the season's over, to try to have the best situation going into 2024. I don't believe for a second that those evaluations, and I don't think he means that those evaluations are just now starting after the bowl game. These are certainly something that's been ongoing. But Ellis, maybe what exactly that timeline is going to be is unclear, and what moves he's going to make is also unclear. I do expect there to be defensive staff changes, but it's just a matter of at what level they are and who's affected by that. We don't know at this point.
So let's move back to a little bit toward this game, very specifically. Tigers start off slowly. Garrett Nussmeier starts off slowly. They have trouble moving the chains, converting third downs. And then they do get it together. Obviously, I think in the immediate aftermath of this game, Garrett Nussmeier is the story. I don't think that's too much of a reach. When the chips were down, he came through. Everybody's going to remember the 98-yard drive. He led LSU on, starting with about 6 minutes to go, to finally put him ahead. He finishes 31 of 45 for 395 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. And Wilson, we'll get to that. Matter of fact, we may get to that right off the bat. We know to expect that Nussmeier you almost can't help but make a few more mistakes than Jayden Daniels did. Jayden Daniels was otherworldly exceptional. In addition to so many other things, he was otherworldly and exceptional at protecting the football. We believe that Nussmeier, his turnover ratio just sort of can't help but be a little bit higher. Question is how much higher. And before we get too far into that, let's discuss Nussmeier, how he looked, how he sort of seemingly progressed through the game, and obviously finishing the job in the fourth quarter.
That 98-yard drive, like you said, is what everyone's going to remember, and for good reason, because that was the thing that you can point to and cling on to the most for some optimism and positivity heading into next season. This was a fantastic display of what he can do at his very best. because he throws the 37-yard completion to Kyren Lacy along the right sideline, and then he comes back across the field with a 40-ish yard completion to Chris Hilton, a throw that he just laid out there for Chris to go and make, and he did. He set them up at the 7, flips the field in back-to-back plays. LSU's deep in its own territory right before those two throws. And then on the 2 plays later, after a short Josh Williams run, he rips the touchdown to Brian Thomas to take the lead. And Garrett, in those situations, I thought his answer about this was very interesting. I'll pull it up here just real quick about his mindset going onto the field there. He said, "It is what it is. You've got to do what you got to do to win the football game. It doesn't matter if you've got to start from the 1, the 2, or get the ball at the 30. You stick to the process. You go play by play." And that's somebody are really revealing, because it's somebody who is steady in those moments, and you hadn't been able to ever see it from Garrett because he'd never been in those situations before. But he goes out there in his first start and he does that to end the game. And asked him post game, we talked with him over the last couple of weeks about waiting for 3 years for this moment to finally get his first career start and what it was like for it to end like that. And he kind of chuckled and, in typical Garrett fashion, said God is good, and that he was very grateful and thankful for that kind of game, and to have this going into the offseason to propel not just himself but the offense. And he kept saying that. He kept talking about it as a whole unit, not just himself but the entire offense, because that's how he sees it.
Rab, I thought, piggybacking on what Wilson said, he mentioned on that 98-yard drive, I thought it was particularly interesting and probably encouraging if you're an LSU football fan. The 2 of the major plays on that drive, they went to Kyren Lacy and to Chris Hilton. These are 2 players we don't know for sure. Check me on this, Wilson. Do we know for sure whether Lacy's coming back? As he said,
he's coming back.
Okay, so he's coming back, and we obviously expect Chris Hilton to come back. Those, Xavier Thomas notwithstanding, those are going to be 2 of your most relied upon, certainly 2 of your most seasoned receivers going forward. We'll get to back to Nussmeier in a bit, but Rab, just that had to have been an encouraging piece of playmaking there on the part of Chris Hilton and Kyren Lacy.
Yeah, I mean, Blake Neighbors, as Wilson talked to his mom, she knew it was his last game, so he's leaving. Brian Thomas had 2 more touchdown receptions. He looks like a first-round draft pick. Why wouldn't these guys go? So you need some weapons for him to work with this year. And Kyren Lacy has been the 3rd guy. He's been the Terrace Marshall of this group, going back to the 2019 trio of receivers LSU had. And then Chris Hilton's gotten some spot play here and there. But Hilton also had that wonderful tight-roping catch on the side of the end zone for a touchdown that they reviewed that Luke Fickell, the Washington coach, was not very happy about. But they said he got his right foot in and certainly a possession.
Cost him a timeout. Yeah.
It did. It was a challenge they made, and worth challenging. But they said he made the catch, and that shows some good chemistry between him and those guys. And you hope there'll be some other receivers for LSU. They hope there'll be other receivers that come along. But those are 2 good guys to start with. That's for certain.
How about Nussmeier? Just your two cents on Nussmeier and how he played. Well,
I mean, that drive was, that was epic stuff. I mean, Wisconsin, as we've said, that's the strength of their team is their defense, a top 20 scoring defense. They hadn't given up this many points all season long. And with the chips down, he completes a 43-yarder and then a 37-yarder, and it sets up the touchdown pass to Brian Thomas at the goal line. And it's confidence building. It's huge for him personally. It's huge for the team's confidence in him. And it certainly doesn't make anyone forget about Jaden Daniels and winning the Heisman Trophy, obviously, but it certainly makes them feel a lot better going into the offseason. But that's a drive people are going to talk about for a long, long time. As they said in an old Western, which I think a line we can pinch here. I like to pinch a line. When the legend becomes fact, print the legend. That drive's going to become legend. And Garrett Nussmeier put on some legend-making kind of stuff on that drive and showed what he can do. It's different from Daniels. There were opportunities today. Jaden Daniels would have took off and ran. He stayed in the pocket or rolled out and tried to extend the play. He never rushed. He didn't have any rushing yards today. It wasn't sacked. Didn't take off and run at all. He can, but he just didn't. And it's different. It's going to be a different-looking offense from what we've seen the last 2 years with Jaden quite a bit. But it doesn't mean he can't move the ball and be effective. And almost 400 yards passing today and 3 touchdowns shows that effectiveness, and it certainly bodes very well for LSU next season.
So before we go any further with the Garrett discussion, we've talked on this podcast a few times about LSU and whether or not really needed a transfer portal quarterback. And we all sort of came to a point of conclusion where they needed a portal quarterback to at least provide depth. But Rab was, I think, in a little bit more of the camp. They needed someone who could maybe even be the starter. At least I think he thought that at one point. Correct me if I'm wrong. But now after seeing this in Garrett today, Rab, what is your confidence level in Garrett Nussmeier heading the offseason?
It's a lot higher. I mean, this is a look. We thought the way the game started might be how it might go for a lot of the contests. There's a lot of empty possessions for LSU to start. He had a wide open Brian Thomas early in the game, and he was rolling out, and the pass drifted out of bounds, and Thomas couldn't quite keep his feet in, and otherwise they would have had a huge gainer to maybe set up an early score, and they were shut out in the first quarter, right? So it was the first time. The only other time they failed to score in the first quarter this year was against Arkansas. So it was a rare thing to see, and it's like he's kind of shaky. He's not, he's maybe forcing it a little too much. But as Brian Kelly said, he grew in confidence as the game went on. He started checking. He started checking and changing protections and that sort of thing, and I think grew tremendously. Look, as we said, this would be a very pivotal game for him. I said as well, this is a pivotal game for him. You miss seeing Jaden Daniels, but it's good for LSU and certainly Garrett Nussmeier going into next season that he gets to play, because Jaden was not going to get to come back no matter what. So it was it was good that he got to start before having to start against USC. This game will help. This performance will help him and help LSU win that game. And winning that game against USC in Las Vegas in September might help them get in the college football playoff. You never know. All the little things are going to count. But yeah, I think to go back to your original question, Wilson, I think you have to say confidence is higher in Garrett Nussmeier because, as you said, we didn't have a lot of sample size. He threw fewer passes this year than he did last year. He played in fewer games. So Jaden had to stay in there and keep pitching in a lot of games because the defense was giving up so many points. And but when it mattered, he delivered. And when you perform is one of the biggest things. And coming through in the clutch, and he did. And I think that's just going to do tremendous things for him, for the team, and for their confidence in him to execute an offense that will be looking very different next year from the way it looks this year.
Speaking of coming through in the clutch, the defense actually did come through in the clutch when they absolutely needed to stop and they absolutely needed pressure. They finally did. The question, of course, that begs the question, well, where was this pressure the entire rest of the game, and for that matter, the rest of the season? We can get to the secondary, which has its own issues, but generally speaking, I would put it to you, Wilson. How do you assess LSU's front seven in their performance in this game?
That they came through and applied pressure when it mattered at the very end. Like you said, I mean, they had finished with 5 sacks, but 3 of them came on the last 3 plays. And that matters, obviously. LSU's trying to protect the lead, seal a game, and it did. But throughout the game, there was some other moments they got pressure. I mean, Mason Smith had a sack. I think, Mekhi Wingo had another sack early. And so, but it was kind of like, other than that, it was sort of like what we've seen in large part of this defense all year, which was, they often wanted, coming to the season, the thinking was that LSU was going to have a strength in the front seven and they were going to be able to rely on that. And they weren't able to until the very end of the game. What comes to mind is, and one player in particular, is the touchdown run that Wisconsin had at the start of the third quarter, a 33-yard cutback through just a massive cutback lane where the defensive front just got folded out of the play. And then there was bad angles in the secondary, which was a prevalent all game once again. Some missed tackles, open receivers, and bad angles that just plagued this team the entire year. Those showed up. They didn't just go away in the bowl game magically. But I think you saw a difference today with Mekhi Wingo back. He obviously, he had his 2 sacks. Certainly him not being at full health, even when he was available this year, and then not being able to play near the end of the season affected this defense. If he had been at full strength all season, maybe it looks a little bit different, because he showed today that he could be and can be and is a disruptive player when he's at his full strength. And then, Mason Smith, you saw what you were hoping to see more out of him, this year, which was being a little bit more disruptive and applying some pressure. And, it was just, unfortunate that, it was unfortunate that didn't show up throughout the year, all year, the way that it needed to. But at least in this one game in particular, in the fourth quarter, they were finally able to get to the quarterback.
So with that, you mentioned Mekhi Wingo and Mason Smith, two players who obviously there was a lot expected from them this year. The question then becomes, do you expect them back next year?
We don't know. I don't want to speculate too much on it at this point. I mean, just because we've asked Mekhi Wingo that directly, and he said that he was waiting until after this game to make a decision. Didn't get an indication from him, post game yet or anything. So we'll have to see. But it does feel like there's going to be some returns on that defensive line, especially at defensive tackle. Brian Kelly was asked about not going after a defensive tackle in the transfer portal, and he said one of the reasons was that they felt good about retention. And so we'll see what we feel good about retention ends up meaning. If they have a few guys there who are draft eligible, Jacoby and Guillory, Mason Smith, and Mekhi Wingo. And if they're feeling good about retention, then they would probably expect to at least get a couple of those guys back, and maybe all three. We'll see what they end up deciding in the days ahead. That draft deadline is January 15th.
In addition to retention, there is addition. LSU got quite the New Year's surprise, a welcome surprise. Dominick McKinley flips from Texas A&M, the five-star defensive tackle from Acadiana. He flips from Texas A&M to LSU at about midnight Eastern time, where you guys are right now, and that was certainly a welcome. That was thought to be certainly a possibility as LSU tries to close out this recruiting class. Dominick McKinley and Terry Bussey, the athlete from East Texas. Everybody had them two pegged as the final two targets in LSU's class. LSU certainly needed a defensive tackle, and they needed to close out with another blue chipper, and you really can't afford to let a star defensive lineman go elsewhere, not only elsewhere, but to somebody else within the conference. Rad, this has to be nothing but good news for Brian Kelly, who is facing questions about whether he's going to recruit to the level that LSU needs him to recruit to. And it's also good news for the LSU football team next season, just in terms of a straight personnel issue.
Yeah, depth at the defensive line, especially on the interior positions, was a huge concern going into the season. Wilson and I were talking about that after the game. And so, he's a freshman. How much will he play right away? We don't know, but he certainly can provide depth. And he's an in-state player, the top player in the state. They did very well in state overall, but he was the one who would look like he was going to slip away. And now they've got him back in the fold at LSU. And, it's one of those things. There's people, if I may get on my soapbox for just a minute, people demand so many snap judgments in sports these days. They want you to have we want to have an instant take on everything. And the instant take on LSU's recruiting class was, this is a huge disappointment. They're 12th or 13th in the country. Well, now they're 7th in the country, according to on 3.com's composite ranking. And take that for what you will. And these are all very subjective things, obviously. But it's not. It's looking like not a disaster. It's looking like a class that LSU can build on, and it's a class that could be leading into an even better class in the next recruiting cycle, because they have some really high-profile athletes they're going after and could be landing in the near future for the class of 25. So it's probably the best thing that happened to LSU all day defensively. Dominick McKinley announcing his commitment to the Tigers. So
the last couple of stops, you have to give credit to the last couple of stops now.
I know, but like I said, this is important to
long term. Yes,
that long term it's important. And I'm going to say of those three players that Wilson mentioned, I'm going to say 2 out of the 3 are going to come back. I think Mekhi Wingo, I'm just my opinion, the fact that he wanted to come back and play in this game, and it really meant something to him. He said, "I wear number 18. I need to play with my guys," and so he wanted to play. That kind of indicates to me that he might come back next year. I think Mason Smith definitely needs to come back. I think Jacoby and Guillory could come back. I think he would benefit from coming back, but players don't always do what's in their best interest in terms of their eligibility. But I'm going to say they're going to get 2 out of 3 of those guys to come back next year.
So speaking of coming back, let's discuss the offense just a little bit here. We discussed obviously Kyren Lacy and Chris Hilton in the wide receiver position to some degree. The offensive line, in all likelihood, is going to come back completely intact. We don't know obviously about Lance Hurd, at least at the moment. Wilson, you're shaking your head. Go ahead.
Charles Turner already accepted an invitation to the Senior Bowl, so they'll be replacing a center, and they'll most likely be DJ Chester stepping in for his spot. But otherwise, yes, 4 out of the 5 can come back. We're waiting on draft decisions for Garrett Dellinger and Miles Frazier, but those are 2 guys who might. I think have a good chance of coming back, and so we'll see how that kind of shakes out over the next couple of weeks. But 4 out of the 5 could be coming back. Continue.
No, it's good. I'm glad he corrected me. This is twice now. The running back position. You discussed obviously this with Josh Williams, who has said to this point that he's leaning toward coming back. We don't know about Logan Diggs, but past that, LSU does have sort of the veritable stable. They do have several running backs who you'd have to feel really good about coming back to next year's team.
Another takeaway from this game was Kyren Lacy and how much of a focal point he probably needs to be of the offense next year. That one drive where he ended up scoring, he shakes people the way not a lot of people can, and he's got power to him as well, as we've seen multiple times this year, just running over people. With the very limited touches that he had this season, he made it certainly an impression with them that was quite positive going into next year. And when you look at what the running back room is going to be, if hypothetically Logan Diggs goes off to the NFL, then Kaleb Jackson probably slides in as your running back 1, kind of right alongside Josh Williams. Those would probably be kind of your top 2. And then you also got Caden Durham coming in. You'd have Trey Holly. Noah Cain, I think, even has another year of eligibility left, so we'll have to see what he does with that as well. But the way that Kaleb Jackson has run this year, it was phenomenal at times, and it looked even really good today when he was getting some touches that actually had significance to them early in the game. And so he only ended up with 2 carries for 15 yards. And he also had the 1 reception for 13 yards. But doing that with that little touches, he clearly needs to be getting 10 plus a game next season. And that was probably one of the takeaways from this game, was just that is somebody who looks like he can be a focal point of your offense moving forward. And so the running back room seems to be in pretty good shape. And as we mentioned, looking ahead to the future and recruiting and all of that, on January 3rd, Harlem Berry commits. He's top running back in the country out of Louisiana. And, there's a good chance LSU is going to land him. And so Frank Wilson continues to shape that room into a really positive direction moving forward.
He would be for the class of 2025, correct?
That's
Harlem
right.
Berry. Yep. Rab, one other weapon to take note of. Mason Taylor probably had his best game of this season. If you take a look at it, 7 catches, 88 yards.
He did. He battled some injuries during the year. I think you'd have to say on balance, not that he had a bad year, but a better freshman season. Of course, he most notably that tremendous 2-point catch on the in overtime to beat Alabama. But understandably, he kind of got overshadowed this year by Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Kyren Lacy to an extent. But Malik Neighbors got the career receiving record, and he passed Josh Reed early in the game. And then Brian Kelly said he pulled him out after a little bit of a Malik wanted to go back in, but he pulled him out of the game. And so there were more opportunities for Brian Thomas. 7 targets, 7 catches for 88 yards. And, I think LSU is just going to continue to build out the tight end room. This has clearly been something that is something Brian Kelly considers a staple of the offense. And it was nice to see him back in there. The LSU went with I think Wilson and I were both surprised until later in the game. LSU went with a lot more short passes, passes instead of runs, and so that meant a lot of passes to a guy like Brian Thomas. Very much a ball control kind of passing game. More than I expected. I think we thought they'd take more shots early in the game. Of course, later in the game, Nussmeier did hit the big passes we talked about.
Was that? Do you suppose? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Reb, but do you suppose that was a function of maybe the coaching staff, which incidentally had a new play caller, obviously, for this game? Was that a manifestation of the coaching staff trying to sort of ease Nussmeier into this, or for that matter, keep him away from making a big mistake, trying to take a shot downfield that wasn't there? Wilson, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, if I could chime in, I don't think so. I think it was a product of Wisconsin was playing what Brian Kelly called trap 2 and trap 3 coverages, which is a way to disguise what you're doing. And that for a while there, Garrett Nussmeier was having a little bit of trouble kind of recognizing those things. And once he was able to, because it was his first start, and once he was able to kind of get into the flow of the game and understand what was going on that they were trying to do, he was able to adjust to it and make better decisions, be able to take some of those deep shots. So I think that's kind of what we were seeing maybe early in the game was kind of a product of that. A player who was starting for the first time in an offense that was having to adjust to his style being different than Jaden Daniels. I think that's part of the reason that Mason Taylor ended up being such an outlet in this game. Whereas during the season, Jaden Daniels was throwing it deep so much that Mason Taylor didn't really factor into that because of his role in the offense. But I will say one thing that is not just not to discredit what Mason Taylor did today, because he did have a good game. And one thing that really backs up and maybe stands out the most to me, that he looked more like himself, because he was dealing with an ankle sprain kind of most of the season, was that 45 of his 88 yards came after the catch. He was able to run with the ball in space, and that was a really good sign in particular. But that's just my view on it, was that it was more of what Wisconsin was doing defensively early in the game, and that Garrett trying to settle into it. And then that's why once he kind of settled into it and was able to recognize those coverages that Wisconsin was trying to disguise, that they were able to hit those deep shots. But that's I guess that's my 2 cents.
I would like to go back just 1 minute to the running back situation and Kaleb Jackson, who I admit I've been kind of beating the drum for Kaleb Jackson all year. He can be electrifying with the ball in his hands, and he can run. He obviously caught a pass today. He can return kicks. I think to me he looks like the best LSU running back since Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And in a running back room full of, not to denigrate these guys, but a running back room full of supporting actors, he can be a leading man.
Seemingly has the most potential. And I think the question is, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he doesn't understand so much, everything in the offense. You certainly would figure as a freshman, maybe he doesn't as much as a Noah Cain or a Josh Williams or something like that. But he's got some talent that LSU, because they're not going to have 1,000-yard rushing quarterback next year, with Garrett Nussmeier being the starter, and so you've got to generate more production from the running backs who didn't have to do as much this year. He's a guy who can do that, and he's a guy who needs to be involved a lot more in the offense with a lot more touches. I think, double-digit touches per game for Kaleb Jackson next year. Let's start that campaign right now. Let's see where they go with it. But there was a wonderful touchdown run he had today, and he's just, of course we remember the hit where he just trucked the guy on the sideline earlier this season. Was it Mississippi State? Was it the Mississippi State game? Yeah.
Yes.
It just he's just one of those guys you follow him every time he's on the field and has a chance to touch the ball. So I think it would benefit LSU greatly to get him more involved in the offense next year, and he'll be a sophomore, and he'll have more of a grasp of things going forward.
Somebody else who had a touchdown run today was number 4, which threw everybody for a loop, because we knew that John Emery was not, he was not in the game. Poor John Emery.
On the stat package, they originally put John Emery. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do want to come back to Harold Perkins, but I also want to wrap up here with the offense. As we alluded to, Cortez Hankton and Joe Sloan, the wide receivers coach and the quarterbacks coach, they obviously were tasked as co-coordinators for this game. They put together the game plan, the practice plan. Joe Sloan called the plays today in the press box, and Cortez Hankton was out on the field. Brian Kelly obviously has a decision to make. I would just put it to each of you two gentlemen, based on what you saw today, and perhaps the result of the bowl practice, which we obviously weren't always privy to, but based on what you saw, based on what Brian Kelly saw, if you were him, would you go on ahead and make a promotion from within?
I would certainly feel comfortable doing so for a number of reasons. One, they have proven themselves as recruiters and developers, and those are 2 qualities that LSU definitely wants to keep on staff. And then today, actually, in-game action, we saw them, generate an offense that scored 35 points against a defense that, like we said, had been pretty good this year, especially at limiting explosive plays. And LSU was still able to, once, like I said, Garrett was kind of got into the flow of the game and the offense began to mesh with this new quarterback, they were able to then hit those explosive plays, especially on that 98-yard touchdown drive to win the game. And so I think I would feel very comfortable if I was Brian Kelly elevating them internally and going in that direction. Is he or is he not? I don't have full insight onto that, but I think that he would feel comfortable doing so after what he's seen to this point. And so we'll see if he goes in that direction.
Rab, if this is a pass-fail proposition here, did Cortez Hankton and Joe Sloan pass or fail?
Oh, I think it's a passing grade, for sure. You have to deal with, like I said, a whole different dynamic with the quarterback situation, and then getting reintegrating a guy like Mason Taylor into the offense and trying to get more out of the running backs. And the running backs were okay today overall. It wasn't a super day for the LSU running game. And then try to get Nussmeier more comfortable doing things going down the field. If you're Brian Kelly, again, it's kind of a political situation. You'd love to keep both these guys. If you pick one as offensive coordinator, and you got to pick one. I've seen co-defensive coordinators before at LSU, and that was a disaster. That was 2008. I don't think co-offensive coordinators would be a good thing either. You got to pick. You got to pick a guy, and you risk losing the guy who doesn't get the job, because I think somebody's going to make the other one, an offensive coordinator somewhere, and possibly next season. So, that could happen. So
two good recruiters, too, that you'd just as soon not lose on staff.
Two of the best on the staff, along with, Frank Wilson, who obviously is, who we all know about his resume of recruiting players, especially in state. But I think Joe Sloan, the fact that he was the guy in the press box, Brian Kelly said that he was in the press box. The plays came down from him. They're sent out to the field with input from other coaches. And Kelly made a point in the post game to mention contributions by a lot of people on the staff. Brad Davis, the offensive line coach, suggesting things, and of course Frank Wilson, rotating the way he had the running back rotation going and that sort of thing. So, but to keep both these guys happy. And it's going to be a little hard to do, quite frankly. And you want coaches who are ambitious on your staff. Mm-hmm. You don't want people who are just content to be a down the line coach. But I would think Joe Sloan, based on what we saw today, based on his assistance in helping develop quarterbacks, based on his recruiting ability, I would think he'd be the guy. If you had to pick one, I think he's the one you'd more likely pick. But I can't claim to know Brian Kelly's mind. I just think what seems likely at this point.
So we just moments ago, we mentioned Harold Perkins, star turn at running back. I did want to bring up just sort of the notion of Harold Perkins because, frankly, and this has been, something of a symptom of or a microcosm of the rest of the season, at least at points. We just didn't see a whole lot from Harold Perkins in terms of being the game wrecker, the playmaker extraordinaire on defense, either in this game or in many other games this season. What do you make of this? I will let you go, Rab, wherever you'd like to go with that.
What do I make of him getting in on offense?
Well, no, not so much of him getting on offense, but I was just sort of the notion that the most noteworthy play that he made for 3.5 quarters was on offense, and it wasn't that emblematic of what a lot of what we saw this year. And why?
That was a neat play, and it worked, and it was cool to see. And I like to see that they use some creativity, because LSU doesn't run a lot of trick plays. They didn't have to, the course of the season. They were just good at just blowing right past you and scoring a lot of points and getting a lot of yards.
But I'm really specifically more asking about his sort of.
Yeah, it feels like a lost season for Harold Perkins, really. He last year, I remember thinking he is the most disruptive LSU defensive player since Tyrann Mathieu.
Mm-hmm.
And this year he had a few moments, but of course we started with the whole thing, which was a fiasco when him moving to inside linebacker against the Florida State game. And I'll never forget Marlon Favorite, the former LSU player, saying on the post game, he looked like a robot out there, and he was not comfortable. So they did move him back to more of an edge, and that helped. And of course, he had a big interception in the Missouri game that turned that game around for LSU when they had a chance to fall behind, by like 3 scores. And he did. That was big. And that was their best win of the year. Missouri just beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. So, but still, overall, it just doesn't feel like the season he could have had. And I don't know if it was he was just. It's probably a combination of things. Like I said, that. It wasn't just the iceberg that sank the Titanic. Okay, it was going too fast and ignoring the warnings and the way the ship was built and everything. And it's probably maybe him them thinking too much about his future potential as a pro player, and maybe he reading his press clippings, as they say, a little more and getting a little full of himself, and maybe not working as hard. I don't know, but it just wasn't a great season. And he can come back. He's a great talent. Obviously, we saw today, and apparently we were talking about this in the press box. Apparently, he was a really good running back in high school, as you
yes, he was
a great physical talent. So he can bounce back next year and be that player. But he was a preseason All-American. He was on everybody's preseason All-America team. They won LSU player He was on everybody's
Well,
preseason All-America list, and it wasn't anywhere close to that season for him. But it can be again if with the right motivation and the right direction.
What
it
if I
can be
told you
again.
that
Go ahead.
What if I told y'all that Harold finished the season with 75 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, team high, 5.5 sacks, and 7 hurries? I guess
I would say
I still agree with you that he did not have the season that he could have had, because that basically matched his numbers from last year, as certainly in terms of tackles for loss, hurries, and sacks. But it wasn't as low of a stat output as I maybe expected it to be. But it wasn't as I felt he wasn't maximized the way that he could have been this year.
I personally that would be, to me, that would be the best way to put it, is that it did not feel like that all of his talents and his potential had been maximized. Which look, this is me speaking only for myself, but it makes you have to wonder how much of this was him and how much of this was a product of the coaching staff. It probably was a little bit of both. Go ahead, Rap.
Yeah. The bar was set very high for Harold Perkins coming into the season based on last season. But by comparison, another player who the bar was set high for was Malik Neighbors. And he was preseason All SEC as a wide receiver, and he was expected to be the leader of the skill group, and he delivered. He delivered, more than delivered. He had a season for the ages as an LSU wide receiver. So those numbers are surprising, Wilson, and I'm glad you brought them up. They are surprising, and for a lot of players, you'd say, "Oh, what a great season," but you expected more from Harold Perkins somehow, and it just never seemed like it quite materialized. But he's coming back for another year. He can have an All-American season next season. Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. But maybe he and the LSU coaches, whoever they may be, will learn from this season, and he could be more effective in 2024.
One thing to note real quick about Harold, just real fast, he walked off the field after the game with his left arm in a sling. He had to go off on LSU's last defensive drive. And so he would, like I said, arm in a sling. We don't know anything about his status, what can happen in terms of, what he was dealing with or how it would affect him going to the office or anything like that, but just so people know.
A couple of things here before we wrap this up, before we put the bow on a season, at least for now. We had, gentlemen, you two remember that on a couple of previous podcasts, we played a little over-under game. Wilson, you put it to us, actually. You put both of these to us, actually. Over-under, did we think that Jay Bramblett would have over or under 4 punts? We all said over, so that was true. He wound up with 5 today. And LSU still wound up with 35 points, so I think that it does speak to an offense that can get things going. You also, in a previous podcast, had put an over-under on Whit Weeks' tackle total, and you'd put it at 7. I did not think he was going to get there. Well, Whit Weeks finished with 8 tackles today, 2 solo, 6 assists, and a half a tackle for loss. So, gentlemen, anything you want to say about there? Whit Weeks, Jay Bramblett, really, for that matter, any other performances today that either stood out or were maybe less than what you expected?
I need to get into some kind of like being a line maker or something, like a betting line maker. I mean, I set those really well, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, you did. Yes.
Pat on the back to me. Nothing else really stood out to me. Really, it was good to see Whit Weeks getting a good bit of playing time in this game, 8 tackles, because he's going to be your weak side linebacker most likely next year, next to Greg Penn there in the middle, and we got to see them on the field quite a bit. But other than that, we've already talked about a lot of the individual performances that really stood out in this game. And so, LSU just needs to kind of continue to build on some of those things going into next season, and we'll see how things continue to shape up.
Rab, anybody who overdid it or underdid it today? Anybody else who stood out for you?
Well, I'll tell you someone who overdid it in one respect. And though he led the team in tackles, was Major Burns. There was a lot of celebrating and strutting around by Major Burns for a guy who plays on this defense that I think could use a little humility. He did have 13 tackles and 1.5 tackles for loss. Everything so good for him, but obviously doesn't maybe speak well that he had so many tackles. But Greg Penn, another solid day, 7 tackles, including a forced fumble. Tackle for loss. It was a sack. So, and he's coming back, right, Wilson, as well. next
Most
year.
likely,
So
yes. He still keeps kind of qualifying it just a little bit, saying like as of now, most likely. But it would be a change in his mind if he were to not come back. He is heading in that direction, certainly.
Earlier this week at the press conference for the two coaches, a player from each team got an award, kind of a leadership award, and he got it for LSU. I think that spoke well for what the respect that he commands among his teammates. So there are a lot of key players. We talk about this defense, and a lot of guys underperform. This guy underperformed, that guy underperformed. There's a lot of guys who can improve from one year to the next, and they are talented players. Mason Smith, Harold Perkins, Greg Penn. Ryan was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school in Lafayette, right? There are some very talented guys who, if they could improve their play, the LSU's defense could at least be respectable next year. If they're respectable, I think we got a glimpse today that this offense can be very potent again. I think expecting to be quite as potent would be fair, but maybe not all is as dire for LSU going into the next season as it might look just looking at the defense.
I would like to, sort of along those lines, I'm going to be curious to see how three particular players that we haven't mentioned, how they continue to progress. 3 young players. Well, 2 of them very young. Ashton Stamps, Javian Toviano, and Sage Ryan. We saw certainly they had to play the majority of the snaps at corner the last couple of games, really the last month or so of the season. And certainly have had some rough patches and had some rough patches again in the ReliaQuest Bowl. But I would say certainly with the 2 young corners that there's room for growth there, and they're not going to be by themselves. They're going to have reinforcements come along the way as well in the secondary, and they will need reinforcements and they will need to improve as well. Gentlemen, anything before you guys would like to wrap up so we can finish watching the Sugar Bowl here and figure out who's going to wind up meeting in Houston on January 8th?
Just Happy New Year to everybody out there. And for anyone who's listening or watching, thanks for doing so all season and for keeping up with the Advocate. We really appreciate it.
And you'll read my newsletter that I got to go type after I finish this. I will say the year 3 is a tremendously pivotal year for the LSU program under Brian Kelly. Like I said, he's got a lot of decisions to make on the coaching staff. The newly expanded SEC, the newly expanded college football playoff. LSU can be in that mix, but they've got a lot of work to do to get there. And they were, for all their defensive troubles this year, they were maybe one play away from being in the top 11. Going into the college football playoff, which next year would get them in. So, for everyone there's a lot of reason for you could be kind of gloomy about LSU football, but there's a lot of reasons to be positive, or at least optimistic too. And it's going to be a fascinating offseason. I'm glad we have Wilson Alexander to cover every bit of it for us.
We're glad we have you too to hold the powerful accountable in your role as a columnist as well. Everybody, we appreciate you following along all season. Appreciate all of you all tuning in. Of course, if you don't subscribe to The Advocate already, please do so. To do that, you go to theadvocate.com/subscribe. As Rab had already mentioned, that's a daily newsletter that we put out, but Rab handles it 3 times a week personally. Please stay up to date with all the LSU news. You can get delivered straight to your inbox, straight to your desktop, straight to your phone. That's the LSU newsletter. You sign up at theadvocate.com/LSU newsletter. We typically come to you on the LSU Sports Insider every Monday and Thursday. We are typically live in studio. We're obviously not in studio right now because these 2 gentlemen have had quite a week in Tampa. But we are there every Monday and Thursday live on all our social channels, specifically the YouTube channel, LSU Tigers on NOLA.com. If you don't catch us live there, you can catch us after the fact on those same YouTube channels and social channels. We are brought to you every Monday and Thursday by Champion Wealth Strategies. To learn more about Champion Wealth Strategies, you go to championwealthstrategies.com and plan like a champion today. If you don't catch us here on YouTube, you can also catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever other finer podcasts are found. Gentlemen, please come home safely. Rab, enjoy your mini vacation over there at Disney World. I'm fully expecting pictures of you with the mouse ears on. Wilson, just please get home safely and get back to your beautiful bride. And we will see you all. We will see you all shortly. For Wilson Alexander, Scott Rabalais, I am Perrin Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.